What if one furious outburst could shatter a legacy, break down walls built over decades, and spark an unexpected act of courage that changes to lives forever? At 9,200 feet above sea level, wrapped in a veil of snow and silence, the Summit Crest Hotel wasn't just a luxury resort, it was a fortress of wealth, pride, and secrets. Tonight, beneath its glittering chandeliers, something cracked. The air inside the dining hall was thick with tension. A scream of polished glass followed by a thunderous crash silenced every laugh, every clink of a champagne flute. At the center of the chaos stood Emerson Voss, a billionaire, known for building empires and breaking spirits. His face burned red with rage. Staff froze, guests fled, except for one, a lone waitress, barely 20, feet trembling, heart pounding, stepped forward, not away. No one knew her name yet, but they would. The Summit Crest Hotel towered like a crown above the snowy peaks of Colorado's Silver Divide, isolated, exclusive, and wrapped in a cocoon of opulence. It was the kind of place the world's elite chose when they wanted to disappear in luxury. It was a haven for billionaires who wanted privacy, discretion, and perfection, nothing less. The dining hall was the heart of the hotel. Velvet drapes framed walls of glass that overlooked the moonlit slopes. Crystal chandeliers bathed everything in a golden glow. The clinking of cutlery on fine china blended with the soft notes from a string quartet tucked into the corner and seated at the private corner table. Like a king on his throne was Emerson Voss, the man whose name could move markets. At 61, Emerson was a titan of the tech world. He had turned a failing digital security company into a global AI empire worth over $70 billion. He was brilliance incarnate, sharp mind, relentless discipline, and a commanding presence that bent rooms to his will. But with that brilliance came a shadow, his temper. Everyone in Silicon Valley knew not to cross him. Interns whispered about meetings that ended with broken furniture. CEOs steered clear of public confrontations. Emerson Voss didn't forgive, and tonight, something had pushed him over the edge. It had started like any other evening. The hotel's winter gala private gathering of the ultra-elite. No press, no PR teams, just billionaires, heirs, and CEOs gathered over truffle risotto and vintage wine. At Emerson's table sat three men, his longtime attorney, a young protege, and his chief operating officer. The mood had been light at first. Toasts were exchanged. Deals hinted at. Then the coup. Michael Varelli excused himself for a call. He returned 15 minutes later, pale and tight-lipped. He leaned in close and whispered something into Emerson's ear. The transformation was immediate. Emerson froze. Then his fist clenched around the stem of his wineglass. Then, without a word, he stood, his face blank. With fury, and hurled the crystal goblet across the room. It shattered against a column. Wine spattered like blood on the white linens. The room went silent. Waitstaff stood paralyzed. Guests began whispering, then retreating. It was known Emerson had his moments, but never this public, never this loud. He slammed his hand down on the table so hard the dishes jumped. It told him what. Emerson roared at Michael. The room held its breath. Michael tried to speak, voice cracking. It wasn't the right time to. You went behind my back. Emerson bellowed, voice booming off the marble floors. You handed over the prototype. Do you know what that means? Emerson, do you know what I've built? What I've bled for? You think you can just. His voice broke. For a moment, just a flicker, the rage was replaced by something else. Pain. Deep, buried pain. Then the mask returned. His eyes scanned the room, daring anyone to look at him. Guests turned away. A few shuffled quickly toward the exits. No one dared intervene, except her. Her name was Lena Marin. She was new, just 2 weeks into her job at Summit Crest, a college dropout, raised by a single mother in a steel town no one talks about anymore. She'd come to Colorado chasing a fresh start after everything back home had crumbled. She'd only gotten the job because another server had broken her ankle on the icy service steps. Lena wasn't experienced, she wasn't polished, but she was present, alert, and hard-working. And tonight, she was watching. She had watched Voss's hand tremble as he clenched the table. She had watched the COO's eyes fill with regret, and she had watched everyone walk away, except her. Her hands shook as she set down her tray. Her knees begged her to step back, but she didn't. She took one step forward, then another, and suddenly, She was at his table, standing alone in front of a storm. Asterisk, sir, she said, her voice firm but soft. Would you like a glass of water? Silence. Emerson blinked. The coup, an attorney, both looked stunned. The other staff stared from the kitchen door, mouths open. I'm not thirsty, Emerson said through clenched teeth. But you're angry, Lena replied gently. He stared at her. You're brave, he said, voice low and crackling. Or stupid. Maybe both, Lena said. A beat. Then, for the first time that night, Emerson Voss exhaled. Something shifted. Do you have any idea who I am? He asked. I know you're someone who's hurting, she answered. And I know I'm not afraid of you. He laughed, dry, disbelieving. Everyone's afraid of me. Lena shook her head. Maybe they are. But I think what scares them more is what you're becoming. Another silence. Then Emerson did something no one had seen in years. He sat down, not in defeat, not in anger, but in exhaustion, and across from him, Lena gently poured him a glass of water. Asterisk. Behind the velvet curtains, the staff buzzed in stunned silence. Who is she? A server whispered. She's toast. He's going to fire her. But the head chef watched with a different look in his eyes. No, he said softly. Something's different. Asterisk. Emerson didn't say another word that night. He finished his water, then stood. As he left the dining hall, he turned to Lena and said, be here tomorrow, same time. And then he was gone. But the storm had only just begun. Lena didn't know it yet. But stepping up that night would change everything, not just for him, but for her too. Secrets would come to light, wounds would open, and a bond would form that no one saw coming. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply not walk away. Asterisk. The morning after the storm, the Summit Crest Hotel stood eerily quiet beneath a sky of soft blue and fading frost. Fresh snow had dusted the evergreens overnight, as if nature had tried to paint over the chaos of the night before. But inside the hotel, whispers still hung in the air like smoke. Lena woke earlier than usual. She hadn't slept much. Her heart still echoed with the weight of the moment, the look in Emerson Voss's eyes, the fury, the silence that followed, and his final words to her. Be here tomorrow, same time. She didn't know what it meant. Orders, a warning, a thank you. Still, she tied her apron tighter and walked back into the world where she had crossed a line no one else dared to. As she passed through the staff lounge, eyes followed her, some curious, others wary. One of the older waitresses, Clarissa, touched her arm gently and whispered, don't take it personally if he doesn't even remember you. But Lena wasn't worried about being forgotten. She was more concerned about what he might remember. At 6 p.m. sharp, she stood near the velvet-curtained table again, just like the night before. There was no command to be there, no scheduled shift, no guarantee he'd even show up. But something inside her called it instinct, or to back away from unfinished stories. The dining hall had been reset, polished to perfection. The shattered glass had long since been cleaned. The night's buzz began to build again with clinks of silver and soft laughter. But Lena waited quietly, her hands folded behind her back, staring into the shadows at the corner table. At 6:17, Emerson arrived. He walked in alone. No entourage, no coat, no expression. His eyes scanned the room until they found her. He didn't say a word, just sat at the same table as the night before and looked down at the untouched place setting. Lena approached slowly. Would you like the same wine as yesterday? She asked. No wine, he said. Just tea green, no sugar. She blinked. Of course. He watched her walk away, his gaze unreadable. When she returned with the tea, he gestured for her to sit. She hesitated, glancing around. I didn't ask, he said. I offered. Sit. She sat. The room seemed to spin slower around them, as if time was observing the moment too. You didn't run, he said at last, fingers lightly tracing the rim of the teacup. No, Lena replied. Why? I think people who yell the loudest are often the ones no one ever really hears. Emerson let out a soft sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. That sounds rehearsed. It's not, she said. It's remembered. For a moment, his mask cracked. My father used to say something like that, he murmured. He was a butcher, never spoke above a whisper unless someone cut the meat wrong. What happened to him? Lena asked. He died before I made my first million. There was no emotion in the words, but Lena felt something heavy behind them. You know, he continued, people think I'm cruel, cold, dangerous, but they forget what I've had to become just to survive the men who were worse. I don't think you're cruel, Lena said. I think you're exhausted. Emerson didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at the tea in his cup like it held answers to questions he wasn't ready to ask. Then he said, "You remind me of someone I lost." Lena's breath caught. Who? He didn't answer. Not with words, but something changed in his expression, a flicker of memory, maybe regret. The room blurred around them as the moment deepened. "I built everything so no one could ever take anything from me again," he said finally. "But it turns out, the more you build, the more there is to lose." Lena nodded. She understood more than he knew. "I think sometimes," she said, softly, "the people who lose the most end up becoming the ones who protect the most, just in the wrong ways." For a long while, they sat in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the rare silence that only happens when two people realize they've seen something in each other no one else notices. Finally, Emerson stood. He placed a folded envelope on the table. "Read it," he said. "Then decide if you want to come back tomorrow." Lena watched him walk out again, this time with a slower pace, his shoulders just a little less rigid. She opened the envelope after he left. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a threat. It was a letter, handwritten. It said only this: "The man you saw last night is who I swore I'd never become. If you're still willing to talk tomorrow, maybe I can start becoming someone else." Lena folded the letter with shaking hands. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this much: she wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a mirror he hadn't dared face in years, and sometimes, all it takes to start changing a life is someone who refuses to walk away. The wind howled outside the glass walls of the Summit Crest dining hall the next evening, whistling through the towering pines like a warning or maybe a whisper. Snow piled gently at the corners of the resort, softening everything it touched, except the things within. Inside, beneath the chandeliers and the gleam of silverware, something invisible was shifting. Lena stood in front of the velvet curtain again, holding her breath. She had read the letter a dozen times. The words were burned into her thoughts, not because they were poetic or grand, but because they were honest, raw, vulnerable, the kind of honesty that usually came only when someone was tired of pretending. She didn't expect Emerson Voss to show again. Men like him didn't apologize. They didn't open doors they'd spent a lifetime sealing shut. But just as the clock struck 6 o'clock, the entrance opened, and there he was, this time in a black wool coat, not his usual tailored armor. He looked different, not softer, not smaller, just less hidden. He approached without the usual weight in his steps, and sat in silence. Lena didn't greet him with a menu. Instead, she placed a fresh cup of green tea in front of him before taking the seat across. From him, no permission needed now. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, tension melted slowly in the warmth between them. Then Emerson said, "Do you know what the hardest part of building an empire is?" Lena looked at him, keeping it from becoming a prison. His eyes narrowed slightly. "That's accurate." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photograph, folded, worn. He slid it across the table. Lena hesitated before opening. It was a girl, maybe 12 or 13, smiling in front of an old playground. Her hair was tangled, her clothes simple, but her smile, it was the kind that dared sadness to come any closer. "She was my daughter," Emerson said. Lena's breath caught. He nodded slowly. "Her name was May. She was my world, and I lost her." Lena closed her fingers around the photo gently, like it might break if she moved too quickly. "I wasn't there," he continued. "I was halfway across the world, signing a deal I thought would make us unstoppable, and she was ... here, at home. A rare infection. By the time they reached me, I was too late." The room seemed to blur. The air between them thickened with a pain Lena knew too well, grief that had no shape but took up all the space anyway. "She used to call me the ghost," he added after a long pause, "because I was always there, but not really." Lena looked down at the photo again. "She looks brave. She was stronger than I ever was," he said, "and smarter. She once told me that the real test of a person wasn't how high they climbed, but how often they looked back to see who was still behind them." He stared into his tea. "I never looked back, not once." "You're looking now," Lena said quietly. For a moment, neither of them moved. The noise of the dining hall faded, replaced by something deeper: connection. Two people who carried different weights, but somehow recognized the same pain. Then Lena did something she hadn't planned. She reached into her apron and pulled out a tiny folded note. She hadn't meant to give it to him, not yet, maybe not ever. But something told her now was the time. She slid it across the table. He raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "My truth," she said. He opened it slowly. The paper trembled slightly in his fingers. It was written in neat, careful handwriting. "I watched my dad lose everything, his job, his pride, his health, and he still managed to show up for my school play in a wrinkled shirt and tired eyes. That's the version of success I grew up with. Not perfect, but present." Emerson folded the note without saying anything, but his fingers lingered on the crease gently, almost protectively. Then he looked at her, and something behind his eyes shifted again. "Do you think I'm beyond fixing?" he asked. Lena smiled faintly. "I think you're asking the wrong question." He tilted his head. "I think the better question is, do you want to be someone your daughter would recognize, someone she'd be proud of now?" He didn't answer, but he didn't have to, because in that moment, the walls round him, the ones no lawsuit, no scandal, no reporter had ever been able to breach, began to crack, and Lena saw the man behind. The empire, not the billionaire, not the broken tyrant, just a father still trying to forgive himself. The rest of the world still thought of Emerson Voss as unshakable, but Lena had seen the truth, and she wasn't going anywhere. The following night, the mountains seemed more silent than ever, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The snow no longer whispered against the windows, it pressed, heavy and still, like it too was waiting to see what would unfold next. Lena arrived earlier than usual. She wasn't scheduled. She didn't need to be. Something far stronger than duty pulled her there. A feeling, a quiet knowing that stories like this, the ones unfolding between herself and Emerson Voss, didn't come along often. And when they did, they asked for something more than routine. They asked for presence. Tonight, he was already at the table. When she walked in, that alone made her pause. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't staring at a screen or scribbling notes like the nights before. He was simply sitting, hands folded, a small leather notebook placed in front of him, unopened. As she approached, he looked up and said, "I want to tell you something before I lose the nerve." Lena sat without a word. He didn't need her to speak. He needed her to listen, and she knew the difference. "My first company failed," he began, spectacularly. "No one remembers it now. They only remember the one that followed, the one I built from its ashes." She nodded gently, encouraging, without pressure. "I started it with a partner, my best friend from college, Benji. We were two kids with wild ideas and no business experience. He believed in people. I believed in strategy. And it worked. For a while, until the investors showed up." Lena watched his fingers tighten around the edge of the notebook. "They said we had to cut costs, lay off staff, restructure." Benji pushed back, said it went against everything we stood for. "I told him I'd handle it." A pause. "He trusted me." Emerson looked up, his eyes glassy. "I cut him out of the company a week later." Lena inhaled sharply but didn't speak. "I told myself it was necessary," he continued, "that I did it to protect the company. But the truth is, I was afraid he'd slow us down, afraid he'd care too much. Investors liked me more. They wanted someone who made decisions without hesitation. So I became that person." Lena said softly, "And what did you lose in the process?" His voice cracked just slightly. "Everything that mattered." For a long time, they sat in silence again. Then Emerson reached for the notebook. "This belonged to him. I found it after he passed away last year." Lena blinked. "You reconnected?" "No, not really. We spoke once, years after the fallout. It WASN kind. He never forgave me. But when he died, his sister sent this to me. Said he wanted me to have it." He opened it to a random page. Handwritten notes filled the margin, sketches of business ideas, quotes about loyalty, little reminders that said things like "Don't forget to call Mum," and "Always treat people like it's the last time you'll see them." "He never stopped dreaming," Emerson said quietly. "Even when I took everything from him." Lena reached out and gently touched the edge of the notebook. "Then maybe it's time someone carried his dreams forward." He looked at her like she'd spoken a language he hadn't heard in years. Then he said something she didn't expect. "I want you to come with me tomorrow. Off the mountain." She raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "To see someone I haven't seen in 15 years. Lena hesitated. "Why me?" Because you're the only person who's looked me in the eye without fear or expectation, and I need someone like that next to me. Even if they say nothing, even if it all goes wrong. She could have said no. She should have. She barely knew him. She was just a waitress in a remote resort. But the truth was, she did know him now. Not the headlines, not the public face. She knew the pieces that hurt, the memories that haunted, the man beneath the empire who wanted to be something more than powerful. She nodded. "Okay," she said, "I'll go." The next day came colder than the last. They left, early, no driver, no security, just Emerson behind the wheel of a modest black SUV, and Lena beside him, the mountains slowly fading in the rear view. As they drove, he said very little, but his grip on the wheel, the way he blinked longer than necessary at stoplights, told her everything. He wasn't just driving to a destination, he was driving into his past. They pulled up to a small house, in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of Boulder, neatly kept, with a porch swing and flower beds that had long since frozen. It looked like the kind of place untouched by billionaires or boardrooms. Emerson hesitated before knocking. A woman opened the door. Older, graceful, sharp, dash-eyed, double quotes, Emerson Voss, she said, not with malice but with history. "Sophia," he replied softly, "I was hoping we could talk." She looked past him at Lena, then back again. "This isn't about forgiveness, is it?" "No," he said. "It's about accountability." Sophia stepped aside. "Then come in." As they entered, Lena caught a glimpse of the hallway wall photos of Benji at different ages, smiling with people who clearly loved him. Pictures of birthdays, a diploma, a newspaper clipping with a small headline, "Local startup wins innovation award," not a trace of Emerson's name. They sat in a quiet living room, filled with soft light and older furniture. No one spoke for a moment. Then Emerson said, "He never stopped believing in people, did he?" Sophia shook her head. "Even when they didn't deserve it." He lowered his eyes. "I ruined something beautiful," he said. "And I've spent every day since convincing myself it was for the greater good." Sophia crossed her arms. "And now I know I've built a tower of success on a foundation of regrets." Sophia turned to Lena. "You're not family. Why are you here?" Lena met her gaze calmly. "Because sometimes it takes a stranger to remind someone who they really are." Sophia looked at her for a long time, then back at Emerson. "He wrote a letter to you, never sent it." She disappeared down the hall and returned with a sealed envelope, handed it to him. "Maybe now's the time." Emerson opened it with trembling fingers. His eyes scanned the page, then filled with tears. Lena couldn't read it, but she didn't need to. Somewhere in those lines, a door opened inside him that had been locked for decades, and something told her this was just the beginning of the real story. The sun rose slow and reluctant over the Colorado horizon, casting a soft amber light across the sleeping rooftops. Inside the small house in Boulder, time seemed to slow with it. Emerson sat at the kitchen table, the letter from Benji still clutched in his hand, its creases deeper now, worn from reading and rereading. He hadn't said much since Sophia gave it to him. He hadn't needed to. Lena stood by the window, quietly observing the world outside, letting him have his silence. She didn't press him, though the weight in the room had shifted. Something had moved inside him, something important. She could feel it. He finally spoke, voice quiet and unsure. "Benji forgave me." Lena turned to face him, even after everything. He nodded slowly. The letter didn't say it outright, but it didn't need to. He wrote about what we built together, how much he wished it had ended differently. He didn't hate me, he was just sad. Emerson looked up at her. "Do you know what it's like to be forgiven by someone you failed?" Lena's throat tightened. "No," she whispered, "but I know what it's like to wish someone would." They held each other's gaze for a long, searching moment. Then he asked, "What's your story, Lena?" She looked down at her hands, fingers trembling just slightly. She hadn't planned to tell him, not yet, but something in his eyes, the way he had cracked open his soul and let her see inside, made her believe it was time. "I was 17 when I lost my mom," she said softly. "She was a school teacher, quiet, brilliant. She raised me by herself." Emerson's expression sobered, his hands resting on the table now, still and attentive. "She died in a hit and run," Lena continued. "Middle of the afternoon. A busy street. Dozens of people saw it happen, and no one stopped. The silence that followed was almost too loud. I was at home, waiting for her to come back from the grocery store. She was late. I called. No answer. Then came the police. The uniformed apologies. The cold facts. She exhaled slowly, eyes glossing over. They never found who did it. There was a camera, but the footage wasn't clear enough. Case went cold, and she paused. I grew cold too. Emerson leaned forward slightly. What did you do? I ran, she said. Moved out of the city. Took jobs that didn't ask questions. Waitress, cleaner, clerk, anything that kept me moving, because staying still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. Her voice wavered now, but eventually, the running got quieter, and I found myself here, at the Grand Alpine, a place that felt frozen in time, and somehow, that felt safe. Emerson didn't interrupt. His gaze held hers not with pity, but with respect, as if he recognized something familiar in her grief, his own reflection perhaps. Lena gave a small, sad smile. You're not the only one who built something on regret. I built a life around pretending I didn't care anymore. Emerson reached across the table, resting his hand near hers, not touching, but close enough that the warmth traveled between them. Maybe we stopped pretending, he said. Both of us. The drive back to the resort was quiet, not empty, just peaceful. Like two people no longer needing to fill silence with noise. When they reached the summit crest gates, the staff glanced up in surprise. Billionaires didn't come and go without notice. But there was no grand announcement, no press, just the two of them stepping out of the SUV and walking into the lobby like something had fundamentally changed. And it had. The next week unfolded, unlike anything the resort had seen. Emerson began spending his days in the lower levels, not the penthouse lounges or executive suites, but the kitchens, the supply rooms, the laundry quarters, watching, listening, asking questions no one expected. From a man worth $12 billion, he sat with line cooks during breaks. He helped carry crates with the cleaning crew. He spoke to the gardeners in the early morning fog. No cameras, no speeches, just quiet curiosity. Some of the staff were suspicious. Others thought it was some publicity stunt. But Lena knew better. She saw it in the way he lingered after conversations, the way he asked people's names and remembered them, the way he wrote in that same notebook each night, long after the resort lights dimmed. One evening, he stood in the staff dining room and cleared his throat gently. Dozens of employees looked up. I've been coming to this resort for 12 years, he began. I thought I knew it. I didn't. Not really. He paused, glancing at Lena in the back of the room. I've spent most of my life believing leadership was about control, power, speed. But I was wrong. Leadership is about seeing people, all of them, not just the ones at the top. He looked around the room at the dishwashers, the bellhops, the spa attendants. I want to start something new, right here. A foundation funded entirely by my own company's profits. For the people who work in places like this. Housing, education, legal support, mental health care, not charity, respect. The room fell utterly still. Then, quietly at first, someone began to clap. Then another, and another, until the entire room echoed with the sound of hands coming together, not for a billionaire, but for a man who had started to become something more. Later that night, back in the now familiar corner booth, Lena sat with Emerson once more. You meant all of that? She asked. He nodded. Every word. You know people are going to call it a publicity stunt. He shrugged. Let them. I'm not doing it for the headlines. She tilted her head. Then why? He looked at her with quiet conviction. Because, for the first time in my life, I want to build something that doesn't need to be sold. Something that matters because it helps someone else, even if no one ever knows my name. Lena smiled. For the first time in a long time, the kind of smile that didn't come with hidden weight. Maybe she wasn't just watching someone change. Maybe she was changing too. The snow had started to melt early that spring, as if the mountain itself knew something was shifting, something deeper than the seasons. The ice that had clung to the eaves of the Grand Alpine Resort was retreating, drip by drip, revealing stone and wood and truth beneath the white silence. And for the first time in years, the resort wasn't just a sanctuary for the wealthy, was becoming a crucible for something far more rare. Transformation. The story of Emerson Voss was no longer a whisper confined to boardrooms and business columns. It had found its way beyond the peaks into news feeds, podcasts, and dinner table conversations, not because of scandal, not this time, but because of something no one had expected from him: compassion. It started with a video, not one released by his media empire, but captured quietly by a housekeeper's teenage daughter. It showed him sitting on a bench outside the staff wing, speaking to an elderly maintenance worker about his wife's illness. There was no script, no branding, just a billionaire asking, "How can I help?" That clip went viral. And with it came the questions, interviews, invitations. Every talk show and global conference wanted a piece of the billionaire with a conscience. But Emerson declined them, all except one. He chose to speak, live, on the smallest network in his entire portfolio, a station that had once been slated for shutdown due to low ratings. He revived it, staffed it with former employees who had been laid off in past cutbacks, and gave them full control of the broadcast. The press called it madness. But Lena knew better. As the sun dipped behind the western ridgeline that evening, the small studio inside the resort buzzed with quiet energy. No teleprompters, no image consultants, just a single camera, a chair, and the man who had once ruled a media kingdom from behind glass towers. He looked at Lena one last time before stepping on set. "Are you sure?" she asked him. He nodded. "If I don't speak the truth now, I never will." She smiled. "Then say what only you can say." The camera rolled. "I was taught to win," Emerson said to the lens. "From a young age, taught to outthink, outperform, but no one ever taught me how to feel. No one ever told me that success without humanity becomes a prison you decorate with gold." He paused, looked down, looked back up. "I wronged people, some publicly, many in ways the world never saw. I chased ambition like it owed me something, and when I had it all, I was lonelier than I'd ever been." Another pause. "Then one day, I lost control. I raised my voice in a place where no one dared challenge me. Everyone left except a waitress. She stood firm, not because she wanted attention, but because she believed I still had something good inside me." Lena, watching off camera, blinked back tears. "That moment changed me," Emerson said. "It was the first time in years someone looked at me not with fear or praise, but honesty, and that honesty saved my life." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to ask for praise or forgiveness. I'm here to say, it's never too late to become someone better, to make things right, to choose people over power. If you're listening and think you've fallen too far, let me be the proof it's not over. It never was." The screen faded to black. No sponsors, no applause, just truth. The next day, donations to the newly formed Voss Foundation for Invisible Workers poured in. Anonymous gifts, letters, stories, people from all walks of life writing. "I thought no one saw me until I heard you." But it wasn't just Emerson's name they mentioned. It was Lena's. She'd stayed in the background, but people had noticed. Her name appeared in op-eds and interviews, not as a side character but as the one who lit the fuse of change with quiet courage. Then one evening, as the sun warmed the retreating snow, Emerson met Lena in the lodge's garden. The one she'd once said reminded her of her mother's backyard. "You know they want to name the foundation building after you," he said, smiling gently. She shook her head. "They shouldn't. I didn't do anything extraordinary." He looked at her, full of gratitude. "You reminded me how to be human. That's as extraordinary as it gets." A long silence passed between them, the kind filled with everything that didn't need to be said aloud. Then she reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded paper. "A job offer. Running from my past has kept me small," she said. "But I think I'm ready to step into something bigger, maybe help more people find their voice." He opened the paper. It was from a national non-profit, an invitation to join as a community outreach director, full-time leadership role. "You'll be incredible," he said, pride in his voice. She smiled. "And you'll be okay without me?" He nodded. "For the first time, yes." She turned to walk away, her steps light but sure. But just before she reached the doors, she paused and looked back. "Thank you," she said, "for not turning away when it mattered." He smiled. "I should be the one saying that." The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of spring, renewal, hope. And as Lena disappeared through the doors, Emerson turned back to the mountains. He wasn't the same man who'd arrived here with a storm in his chest. And somewhere, high above the clouds, a friend named Benji was smiling, because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is change.